you turn on the recording also?
Yes, ma'am, sure.
I think we
No,
are
ma'am,
not
I cannot. Vijay sir has already run, ma'am.
right.
Right.
So we feel very privileged to welcome our special guest here today, Dr. Deepak Jindal. He's advocate of High Court of Punjab and Haryana and also guest faculty, Department of Laws, Punjab University, Chandigarh. On behalf of the management, principal, faculty, and students of Sri Aurobindo College of Commerce and Management, Ludhiana, I, Monica Sethi, welcome you, sir, to this virtual platform. After seeking blessings of Sri Aurobindo and Revered Mother, I would like to share some brief details about our college. Sri Aurobindo College of Commerce and Management was set up in the year 2004 as one of the foremost centers of specialized learning in the industrial town of Ludhiana by Padma Bhushan awardee Sri S.P. Oswal, who is also the managing trustee of Sri Aurobindo Socio-Economic and Management Research Institute. I'm elated to share with you, sir, that the college has been accredited with Grade A by National Assessment and Accreditation Council, NAC. And now about today's extension lecture. We all know that no theoretical knowledge is complete unless supplemented with experiential learning and practical exposure. So, as a constant endeavor to acquaint the students with the application part of the concepts that they learn in the classroom and to provide them a platform for live interaction with expert practitioners from different areas, regular interactions and sessions with illustrious academicians, industry experts, and practicing professionals are regularly invited to share their knowledge, experience, and expertise. Dr. Deepak Jindal will be sharing with us his expert knowledge on the topic practical aspects of contract law. But before we proceed further with his introduction and then later by the extension lecture on the theme, I would invite Dr. Ajay Sharma to formally welcome our guest. Ajay sir.
Uh, Dear all, and today's speaker, Dr. Deepak Jindal. It is indeed a great moment for us that personality rank Dr. Jindal is with us. He is not only known for his practice, he is also known for the social work. I have been following him from last 10 years or more through the social media or otherwise. I have found that he is very active in different social organizations, helping a lot of the persons in the Chandigarh, Mohali, Panchkula in various aspects. Even the Agarwal Sabha and the Bar Council, even at the Punjab University level, most of our teachers who are interacting with each other regarding the 5-year integrated law program and LLB program, Dr. Jindal has contributed a lot. And from the faculty of law, I know most of the persons are regularly seeking his help in framing the curriculum and various different technical issues. And his contribution has actually created a great goodwill for him. So the very first day when I joined, one thing in my mind was that I must invite him someday to the college and we can interact on the different issues. But anyhow, because of COVID, it became a difficult scenario. But at last, we decided, if not physically, that at least we can have the online interaction. It is a great fortune for the students that the speaker of His Eminence is with us, and I request them. Please ask maximum number of the questions, clear your doubts, because the level of knowledge he is having, probably a person like me who are from the academics teaching the commercial law and other subjects may not be in a position to match it. We know the basics, we know some latest things, but the practical things which the advocate like Dr. Dikhil Jindal is having, we are unable to match. And I will request, I will not like to stand much between you and Dr. Jindal. So I will again request even our teachers who are teaching the commercial laws and laws papers are here in today's webinar. I know they will also be taking up the maximum advantage, and mostly because I have is an author also. I know in books also we fail to update, and most of time we look towards practitioner to guide us what to include and what to exclude. So that will be a great advantage for all of us today. Thanks a lot. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ajay, sir. So now, before we proceed to listen to his expert talk, let me share a brief introduction of Dr. Deepak Jindal with you all. Dr. Deepak Jindal, as we now know, he is Advocate High Court of Punjab and Haryana, and he has done his graduation in Commerce from Punjab University, Chandigarh. He's a BCom, and then he did his Bachelor in Laws from Punjab University, Chandigarh, and Masters in Law from Kurukshetra University, Kurukshetra. And then he also completed his PhD in Laws, which is a great thing to know that he's a PhD as well as he's an advocate. So he did his PhD in laws from Punjab University, Chandigarh. He has worked in the Office of Advocate General, Haryana, as Deputy Advocate General from year 2009 to 2014, and earlier as Assistant Advocate General from 2005 till 2009. He also is a guest faculty in Department of Laws, Punjab University, and he has co-authored books on practice and procedure in courts of law, as told by Ajay sir. So those books are Lawyer's Guide, and another one is e-book for young advocates. He also is accredited mediator from Center for Effective Dispute Resolution UK, and is a master trainer of mediators certified by this same institute, CEDR UK. Among his professional activities, he has attended many conferences and seminars attended as a speaker. Among other activities, he has participated as judge in mediation competition of International Chamber of Commerce, Hong Kong, and also participated as judge in some other competitions. He also has attended training from CEDR UK, London. He has attended many workshops to remain updated on latest legal matters. Among his other professional engagements, he is on the panel of mediators and arbitrators of International Chamber of Commerce, Hong Kong, and Punjab and Haryana High Court panel of mediators since 2012, and also International Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution, New Delhi panel of arbitrators and mediators since 2008. Among his affiliations, he is member of Supreme Court of India Bar Association, Bar Council of Punjab and Haryana, Chandigarh, Punjab and Haryana High Court Bar Association, District Court Bar Association, among the other affiliations that he has. With these words, I once again welcome you, sir. And now I will invite Dr. Deepak Jindal to share his expertise with our students on the topic of practical aspects of contract law. So over to you, Deepak sir.
Thank you very much for the very nice words. It's a matter of great pleasure and a privilege to join this Shri Aurobindo College of Commerce and Management, especially when my dear friend Dr. Ajay Sharma is a principal here. For the first time interacting with the students and teachers of this college. See, I would like to throw some light on my bond with Dr. Ajay Sharma. I would often go to him, and discuss various, points and issues, and he would delightfully, give me time and talk with me, ranging from several topics, one topic to other topic, college and Chandigarh also, about other social issues also. Now, when he got, displaced to Ludhiana, it was a matter of, we were sad on one aspect that he's leaving us, but we were very happy that he's leaving as a principal. And he would definitely, contribute in the progress of this college, Shri Aurobindo College of Commerce and Management. And basically, I came to know about this college through Dr. Ajay Sharma only. And it's a matter of, great pleasure. I'm joining you here on this very special topic of contract law. Before that, I also want to, I read about Shri Aurobindo College of Commerce, its aims and objectives. I really got impressed and inspired. Colleges like these always go, a long way in building up a nation like India, and where, students get to study in a better way from the faculty, from the expert faculty, which Shri Aurobindo College of Commerce has. And today's lecture, today's topic of my lecture is contract law. Basically, I want to tell you, my dear students and my dear teachers, contract law has been as old as the birth of Mahatma Gandhi, as long as the birth of our father of nation. 1872, so long, so way back it was, enacted. It was enacted. Basically, it was enacted means it was long back before that then also. It was enacted as Indian Contract Act in 1872. But what about the laws which were there already before the enactment of this uniform, statute of contract law, Indian Contract Act 1872. Before that, I just, in a very few paragraphs, I want to throw light on this history of Indian Contract Act. When the courts of justice for the 3 presidency towns of Calcutta, Madras and Bombay, they were established. The English common law and the statute law relating to contract was suitable to the Indian conditions were introduced by charters application of the English law to Hindus and Mohammedans. But basically there were some inconsistencies and there was no good coordination. So therefore it led to many inconveniences. To remove this difficulty, the statute of 1781 empowered the Supreme Court, at Calcutta, it was based at Calcutta at that moment, and statute of 1797, the Recorder's Court, that is the court at Madras and Bombay, to determine all matters of contract in case of Mohammedans by the laws governing them, and in case of Hindus by the laws and usages governing them, provided they are not very much inconsistent. And the effects of the statutes was to supersede English law so far as regards Hindus and Mohammedans in the case of contracts. In spite of the changes, made by the statutes of 1781 and 1799, the difficulties being faced could not be solved properly because there was no uniformity. And there were other defects, inconsistencies, there were other loopholes. Now, it was felt very strongly that a comprehensive law must be enacted in respect of contracts. That was the vision then, a comprehensive law. And this comprehensiveness has prevailed even today also, after 150 years also. Accordingly, the Indian Contract Bill was introduced in the legislature and it was enacted accordingly in the year 1872. Basically, I would like to tell, my contract, this LLM thesis was also based on this contract law, measurement of damages for breach of contract. It has been always a delight to teach this, to speak on this subject. My first subject when I was introduced as a guest faculty in Punjab University in 2008, it was contract law only. So I'm always very happy to discuss on this topic. It is connected to our daily lives also. See, Indian contract of law is based on the principles of English law. The Act was enacted in the year 1872. It came into force on 1st of September 1872. It is not an extensive code. It defines and amends only certain parts of the law relating to contracts. Custom, if it is subject to any custom should be reasonable, certain, and very well known. However, and it shall also not be inconsistent with the provisions of the Act. Where the contract law is silent on any matter, Hindu or Mohammedan law relating to contracts shall apply. The law of contract basically deals with promises which create legal obligations. This excludes those promises made in common life, which may be morally binding, but creates no legal obligation. The very well-known case is Balfour versus Balfour. A husband made a promise to a wife in Ceylon that he will send the maintenance if she's not able to join the husband in a due course of time. The husband fails to send her the maintenance. Now the wife came to the court of law and she said, my husband made a promise to maintain me. Now the court refused to specifically enforce that contract because it was not created with the legal obligations, and that contract basically does not create legal obligations. So law of contract therefore excludes those obligations that are not contractual in nature. And the great jurist Salmond, he has rightly observed that the law of contract is not the whole law of agreements, nor is it the whole law of obligations. It is a law of those agreements only which create obligations. And my dear friends, these obligations which have their sources in the agreements, which are enforceable by law. The object of the law of contract is to introduce definiteness in commercial and other transactions. How this is done, let's take an example that a person A, he enters into a contract to deliver 10 tons of coal to other person B on a certain date. Now, since such contract is enforceable by the courts, B can plan his activities on the basis of getting the coal on that fixed date. If the contract is broken, the person B will get damages from the court. And, in order that he doesn't suffer any loss, as simple as that. Another jurist, Sir William Anson, he observes that as the law relating to property had its origin in the attempt to ensure that what a man has lawfully acquired, he shall retain, so the law of contract is intended to ensure that what a man has been led to expect shall come to pass, and that what has been promised to him shall be performed. Now, the Indian Contract Act, it lays down certain general rules regarding contracts. Is this act exhaustive? No, this act is not exhaustive. There are other acts relating to specialized kind of contracts. For instance, we can take Negotiable Instruments Act, the Transfer of Property Act. The Indian Contract Act lays down general rules regarding contracts. Like same as in criminal law, in IPC lays down general rules. It takes into consideration the general acts which constitute the crime. But on the other hand, there are specialized acts of crime also. NDPS Act, Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act. All right, there is a Dowry Prohibition Act. So therefore, those acts relate to specialized kind of crimes. Likewise here, the other acts which relate to specialized kind of contracts, they are, for instance, Transfer Property Act and the Negotiable Instruments Act. I would, again discuss some very important definitions, very important points. What is a proposal? Very simple. When any person signifies to another his willingness to do or abstain from doing anything with a view to obtaining the assent of that other, to such act, he is said to make a proposal. And when a person to whom that proposal is made signifies his assent thereto, the proposal is said to be accepted. A proposal, when accepted, becomes a promise. And every promise and every set of promises forming the consideration for each other is an agreement. An agreement enforceable by law is a contract. An agreement not enforceable by law will be void. All right. Now, every agreement is not a contract, but every contract is an agreement. Every agreement is not a contract, but every agreement is a contract. Now, every agreement which is enforceable by law is a contract, and agreement is a wider term. There may be legal agreements. It is only those agreements that are enforceable in a court of law which are contracts. See, now every agreement is not a contract. A wagering agreement, let's say, is declared by law to be void. So therefore, it does not constitute, it cannot be declared to be a contract. Now, what are the essentials of a valid contract? Section 10 of the Indian Contract Act, it lays down some essentials which are required to make an agreement into a valid contract. Number one, that they are made with free consent. They are made with free consent. Number two, they are made between two or more competent persons. They are made for lawful consideration. They are made with a lawful object. And number five, they are not expressly declared to be void. All right. You know, there are other considerations also, that there must be an intention to create a legal obligation. The terms contained therein must not be vague, must not be uncertain. The agreements must be capable of performance. We do not form an agreement to, you know, do an impossible act. There are some other legal formalities also. Now, and something about offer. You know, offer must be clearly communicated to the party. And acceptance, likewise, must be clearly communicated to the party. Once it is communicated to the offeree, it results in an agreement. Acceptance is the assent given to the proposal. Section 4 of the Act, Indian Contract Act, lays down that the communication of the acceptance, it is complete against the proposer when it is put in the course of transmission to him to be out of the power of the acceptor, and as against the acceptor when it comes to the knowledge of the proposer. Communication of acceptance by telephone. You know, the communication is completed when the acceptance is clearly heard and understood, thus properly received by the offerer. Silence does not per se amounts to communication. Silence does not per se amounts to communication. A very classical case in this regard is the Bank of India Limited versus Rustom Kovasi. Bank of India Limited versus Rustom Kovasi. AIR 1955, Bombay High Court, page 419. It laid down that mere silence cannot amount to any assent. It does not even amount to any representation on which any plea of estoppel may be found, unless there is a duty to make some statement or to do some act free, and offerer must be, must consent. Now, the acceptance must be unconditional and absolute. I would pause here, and again, I emphasize here that the case laws which we discuss, the old case laws, Taylor versus Cardinal, Creek versus Creek, and these Mohori Bibi versus Dharmadas, Mohori Bibi versus Dharmadas Ghosh, this Rustom versus Kovasi, Balfour versus Balfour. The principles laid down in these case laws still prevail today, and these cases are still, taken into consideration. They are still cited by the Supreme Court as well as other high courts in our country. They hold such an esteem to these case laws. The acceptance must be unconditional and absolute. A very good case upon this point is Bhagwan Das Kedia versus Girdhari Lal and Company. The citation is AIR 1966, Supreme Court, pages 543. Plaintiff made an offer on the telephone from Ahmedabad to the defendants in some other place to purchase some goods. The defendant accepted his offer. It was held that the contract was made where that acceptance was communicated. Acceptance was communicated to Ahmedabad, and the contract is completed when the offerer had heard the acceptance at his end, rather than when the acceptor has spoken the words of acceptance, unlike the case when the letter of acceptance is posted and it gets completed the moment it is posted. Now, the point is intention to create legal obligation. The point comes in my mind that intention to create legal obligation, like in the criminal laws, there should be an intention to commit a crime. There is, I will divert from this subject to the criminal law here, to emphasize on the word intention. There is two types of murders in criminal law. Culpable homicide amounting to murder, culpable homicide not amounting to murder. Amounting to murder, their intention is required. Intention of the accused who has committed culpable homicide. Now, the intention is gathered from the circumstances in the criminal law. No accused will come and say that yet I had the intention or I did not have the intention. The intention always has to be gathered from the set of the circumstances. Now here, in contract law, intention to create legal obligation is there. It is necessary. But how, here also how we gather that intention. It is not like in court, the person who is denying the intention, he says that I do not have any intention that time to create any legal obligation. But, the intention is to be gathered here also from the set of facts and circumstances. And, the test of creating legal obligations is objective. What matters is not what the parties had in mind, but what a reasonable man would think of. The classical case is, again, I would say Belfer versus Belfer, 1919. In this, a husband agreed to pay his wife a certain amount as maintenance every month while he was abroad. The husband failed to pay the promised amount. The wife sued him. She was not able to recover the amount. The court held that the parties did not intend to create any legal obligations. Now coming to the consideration. Section 10, one of the very, very essential aspect of a contract is consideration. Among other essentials, I do not say that it is only the essential aspect of contract law. Among other essentials, it is also it is one of the essentials of a valid contract. As per well-known jurist Salmon, a promise without consideration is a gift. One made for consideration is a bargain, and the consideration must be real and not illusionary, although it need not be adequate. All right. See the section 2D, which gives a definition of consideration. It is very important. It gives it is a very wholesome definition. It says, when at the desire of the promiser, the promisee or any other person has done or abstained from doing or does or abstain from doing something or promises to do something, such an act or abstinence of promise is called a consideration for the promise. Therefore, consideration, what is consideration? Consideration basically is a reasonable and valuable benefit passed on by the promiser to the promisee. And section 23 of the Act clearly lays down that consideration or object of the agreement are lawful unless it is forbidden by law or defeat the provisions of any law. So therefore, there is no positive definition of consideration, but there is a negative definition unless it says consideration or object of the agreement are lawful unless it is forbidden by law or defeat the provisions of any law or is fraudulent or involves or implies injury to the person or property of another. Basically, consideration is a recompense. As per Blackstone, consideration is a recompense given by the party contracting to the other. It is the price of the promise. All right. A very old case law Kedarnath versus Gauri Muhammad, 1886 ILR. In this, a town hall building was being constructed, and subscriptions were invited from the public by the Howrah municipality. The defendant in this case was a subscriber to this fund. On the faith of the promised subscriptions, the plaintiff entered into a contract to build the hall. He must have paid some consideration to the third person, the contractor, to build the hall. Now, in this case, Gauri Muhammad, the defendant, he failed to pay the amount and contended that there was no consideration for the promise. The court held in this case that the defendant is liable, as the plaintiff's act to enter into a contract with the contractor was done at the desire of the defendant, and thus it constitutes a lawful consideration. So, there are some other agreements also. There are some exceptions, you can say, which are enforceable, the agreements which are enforceable without consideration. A written and registered document based on natural love and affection between the near relatives. A promise to compensate a person who has already voluntarily, not by request, done something for the promisor. Third agreement which is enforceable without consideration. Third type of agreements which are enforceable without consideration. A promise made to pay a time-barred debt. The first example I quote again. A written and registered agreement based on natural love and affection between the near relatives. The best example in we come across in our daily lives, there is a transfer deed to transfer the property in the blood relations. Transfer deed does not require any consideration. So very often, the family members, they get the property transferred by way of this deed, transfer deed. The object must be lawful agreements. A contract must be made with a lawful object, which means it must not be forbidden by law or defeat the provisions of any law, or it is fraudulent, involves or implies injury to the person. A contract made with an unlawful object, it is void. Very simple, selling tobacco without a license. This has to be gathered from the facts of the case always. That is why the facts of the case are gone through very deeply and very consciously by the courts concerned. Because from those facts only, legal or illegal considerations, legal or illegal object, they will be made out. And agreement to sell drugs, it will also be an unlawful object because it is forbidden by law, and it will defeat the provisions of law. Now, fraudulent agreement are also not enforceable. Immoral agreements, an agreement to run a brothel, opposed to public policy, as per now section 24, if a part of there are agreements where some consideration is valid and the other consideration is void. If no such segregation can be done, if segregation can be done of one part of the agreement and the other part of the agreement, so the one part of the agreement will be valid and the other part will be void. Section 13 says about free consent. 13 says about free consent. Two or more persons, they are said to consent when they agree upon the same thing in the same sense. And very important, very beautiful definition, beautifully explained by this section. Two or more persons are said to consent when they agree upon the same thing in the same sense. As per section 14, consent is free consent when it is not caused by coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, and mistake. I do not want to elaborate on these points. Sections 10, 13, and 14, if combined, they state that in order to constitute a contract, both the parties must give consent to it, and there must be a meeting of minds. Section 10, 13, and 14 combined, they state that in order to constitute a contract, both the parties must give consent to it, and there must be a meeting of minds, consensus ad idem. Further, such consent must be free consent, devoid of any coercion, undue influence, fraud, or misrepresentation. A very classical case in this regard is Derry versus Peake. Derry versus Peake. Why I'm basically focusing on the old case laws, because to confirm that whatever have you read will go a long way, in supporting you in your further career. If you become a lawyer after this, or become, a CA or anything, the laws pertaining to the old case laws, the proposition held in old case laws still prevail, and they still hold value. And on the basis of these propositions only, the latest case laws are being decided. I will deal with the case law here. A very 2017 case, Kanchan Udyog Limited versus United Spirits Limited. Decided by Supreme Court of India. I will tell the case. Very interesting case law upon the waiver of any benefit which the party get, but it waivers that benefit, and also a practical consideration upon elaboration on the measurement of damages for breach of contract. Now, what about a minor? What about a minor when he enters into a contract? As per section 11, every person is competent to contract who is not a minor. Age of majority, of course, 18, and where a guardian is appointed, it is 21. Law, acts as a protector of children's rights because they are not that mature to make rational judgments about contracts. So therefore, an agreement with a minor is void, except where the contract is for his benefit. Quasi contracts, basically, we can deal, say 68 to 72. There is one instance where contract, a quasi contractual like situation is developed when necessities are supplied to a minor or an idiot or an insane person. Now, estoppel cannot be applied against a minor. The minor is not estopped against taking the defense of minor, even if he acted fraudulently. Minor is liable for a tort, but not liable for a tort arising out of contracts. Mohri Bibi versus Dharmodas Ghosh case, 1903, Calcutta. A minor executed a mortgage of rupees 20,000. You all know the facts. The court held in this case that an agreement by a minor was absolutely void, as it is against him. Therefore, the mortgagee cannot recover the money or sell the minor's property. Regarding an unsound mind person cases, Inder Singh versus Parameshwar Dhari Singh. Inder Singh versus Parameshwar Dhari Singh, 1957, Patna. Property worth rupees 25,000 was agreed to be sold for just rupees 7,000. All right. Now his mother proved that he was a born idiot, incapable of understanding the contract and making a rational judgment about his interests. The court held the contract to be void. All right. Now, terms of the agreement must be certain. Agreements must be capable of conference. There is a case, well-known cases of Taylor versus Caldwell and Krell versus Henry. There are specific grounds of frustration if the subject matter of the contract gets destroyed, if the event which is contemplated does not occur, party died or become incapable of performing the contract, any government or legislative intervention which transforms the contemplated conditions at all. All right. So the agreements which are expressly declared to be void, Section 30, agreements by way of the wager. Section 56, agreements to do impossible acts. Section 29, uncertain and ambiguous agreements. Section 25, agreements without consideration. There are other agreements also you can see. Now we come to a very important part of the contract law, the measurement of damages. How the damages are measured if the breach of contract takes place. Section 73 to Section 75, it lays down provisions regarding that area, that ambit, for the measurement of damages for breach of contract. A very classic case law in this case, in this aspect, is Headley versus Buxendale. Headley versus Buxendale. 73 provides compensation for loss or damage caused by the breach of contract. And when a contract has been broken, the party that suffers from such infringement is entitled to receive compensation for any loss or damage resulting from such infringement. Such compensation shall not be given for any remote and indirect loss or damage sustained as a result of the breach. About quasi contracts also, this proposition holds true. Now, in estimating the loss or damage resulting from the breach of a contract, consideration must be given to the means that existed to mitigate, to remedy the inconvenience caused by the non-performance of the contract. This is the consideration which I will show in my the case I'm about to discuss with you. Kanchan Udyog Limited versus United Spirits Limited. And basically, what does loss or damage mean? What does loss or damage mean? It means harm to persons through physical injury, disabilities, loss of enjoyment, loss of comfort, inconvenience or disappointment, injured feelings, vexation, mental distress, loss of reputation. It may be harm to property, for instance, damage or destruction of property, injury to an economic position, which is the amount by which the plaintiff is worse off than he would have been had the contract been performed, and would include loss of profits, expenses incurred, costs, damages paid to third parties. Now there are types of damages: general damages, special damages. While discussing, while referring to this case law of Headley versus Buxendale, actually what happened in that case was Headley was the owner of a mill, and Buxendale was a courier, he was a carrier to anything. Headley wanted the crankshaft, the crankshaft was damaged. The servant of Headley informed Buxendale that bring it immediately, but did not inform the special circumstances that they have only one crankshaft, and if they will not bring that crankshaft within immediate timings, the mill would suffer special losses because they have some contracts in their hands. So in this case, the extraordinary delay happened, and the crankshaft, the carrier was not able to bring that crankshaft in a reasonable period of time. But after a very unreasonable delay, he brought that crankshaft. Now the question arose: what type of damage should be awarded to the plaintiff? In this case also, it was held that only the general damages which any mill would suffer had this crankshaft would not be there, because the mills are not expected that they will have only one crankshaft. This special circumstance that this mill has only one crankshaft was not known to the carrier Baxendale. So the rules state in this case that a party injured by a breach of contract could recover only those damages which were either to be considered reasonably, as arising naturally, that is according to the usual course of things from the breach, or could reasonably have been considered by both parties at the time they entered into the contract as the likely breach of this obligation. So therefore it was laid down that only the general damages, the damages which are general in nature, it will be provided, and not the excessive damages. The special damages will not be provided to the plaintiff. A very classical case in this regard by Supreme Court of India here is Fortune Infrastructure and others versus Trevor Dilemma, 2018, Volume 5, Supreme Court Cases SCC 44. It has been reflected in this case that a balanced approach needs to be used by the adjudicatory bodies in determining what is just, what is fair compensation for contractual damages. Because there cannot be any watertight compartment or any straitjacket formula for calculation of every type of damage. So the award of damages in case of breach of contract, the measurement of damages, always depend upon the individual facts and circumstances of each and every case. Because there are no standard contracts, there are no standard breaches also. All right, and there are no standard business conditions in everywhere. It differs from person to person, place to place, article to article, business to business. Now, in this case, the case arose out of a sale deed for acquiring a flat. Generally, these cases are heard because every time the society floats a scheme in which there are 200, 300 flats are offered, money is taken, but the flats, they are not given to the lottees in a promised time or within a reasonable period of time after that even. Then the conditions occur as to what type of damages should be awarded to the allottees. In this case, the National Consumer Disputes Redressal Commission, the National Consumer Court, it is said National Commission, it allowed the allottees plea and directed the Fortune Infrastructure to not just refund the consideration of the flat with an annual 10% interest rate and the litigation costs, but to also pay an additional compensation to the buyers of an amount nearly twice the consideration of the flat. Now, in this a review was filed. In this case, a review was filed, by the Fortune Infrastructure, but it was dismissed by the NCDRC. Fortune Infrastructure, it approached the Supreme Court, which requested the parties. Every time there is a offer of settlement, offer of time to both the parties to settle the disputes if possible. Therefore, in that direction, the Supreme Court requested the parties to amicably settle the disputes, but which was unsuccessful. The principal issue before the court was what should be just and reasonable compensation for contractual damages. Basically, in this case, the damage which was awarded was twice the amount of the allotment which the allotee had deposited, and some other harassment charges also, the litigation charges also had been awarded by the National Consumer Commission. When Supreme Court was confronted with this issue, and Supreme Court, read the facts and circumstances of the case, it realized that the damages were very irrational and were unreasonably on the higher side. While adjudicating upon the adequateness of damages, the Supreme Court further considered the case law of Ghaziabad Development Authority versus Balbir Singh, 2004, Volume 5, Supreme Court Cases, pages 65. It was held that, what was awarded for, it is essential to be, to come to know what can be the damages for a breach of contract, but, what type of damage should be awarded. Damages in which direction? Damages, what was awarded for breach of contract, it was held in this case that what was awarded for breach of contract is compensation. That is a recompense for the loss or injury, which necessarily has to be based on a finding of loss or injury and has to correlate with the amount of loss or injury. Therefore, in this case also, the Supreme Court reduced the amount of compensation and it brought that compensation to a limit where it correlated with the amount of loss and injury the allotee had suffered in that case. The case which I have in my hand is, this is Kanchan Udyog Limited versus United Spirits. In this case, what happened? Kanchan Udyog entered into a contract with United Spirits that they would manufacture this cold drinks that Thrill, Rush, Sprint, and McDowell's sparkling soda, which the respondent had the license to, and the concentrate, basically the essence of preparation of this non-alcoholic beverage was to be supplied by the respondent United Spirits. Now there are 3 dates very important. 1st of February 87, the manufacturing was commenced by this Kanchan Udyog of these cold drinks, non-alcoholic beverages. After a year or so, 16th of March 88, the contract of supplying the this concentrate essence was terminated by the United Spirits. The manufacturing did not stop there and then, because when the essence is not being supplied by the United Spirits, then the manufacturing should have stopped there and then. But the manufacturing continued for another year. It stopped in the next year in the month of March. 14 months after 14 months. After 14 months of contract termination, this manufacturing stopped. Now, and it sued the Kanchan Udyog sued the United India Spirits. Now, as the damages claimed was very high, the High Court in its original jurisdiction, it entertained the suit and awarded exemplary damages to the tune of 4 crores. What happened? The single bench awarded 4 crore. The division bench reversed the complete decree and the suit was dismissed. So the facts before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court dealt with the issue very elaborately. It dealt on 2 issues basically. Waiver of rights. Waiver of rights and what should be the damages awarded to Kanchan Udyog. It held that since Kanchan Udyog did not, it continuously was manufacturing the non-alcoholic beverages despite the breach of contract, despite the breach of continuous supply by United Spirits. So therefore, they have other means to mitigate their losses, and so also that within that 14 months of continuing manufacturing even after the breach of contract, they did not sue. They did not use their right of suing the respondent, United Spirits. So they had waived off their right. They considered this as waived off their right to sue. And it took the reliance of P. Das versus Apara also in this case, 1974 Supreme Court. Since the Kanchan Udyog had waived off their right to sue United Spirits, so therefore it was held that now it cannot sue the United Spirits in the belated stage, and basically it upheld the division bench judgment of dismissing the suit, and it found that Kanchan Udyog is not entitled to any relief at all. Basically, while discussing the remoteness of damages, the likelihood of damages, every time, it has to be kept in mind that the party who has suffered the loss should be placed in the same position as far as compensation in money, can do it as if the party in breach had performed his contract or fulfilled his duty. I know I have crossed my time. I wanted to speak more, but there is a time limitation.
No, sir, it was absolutely fine. These simple cases that you are sharing with us, that is very eye-opening for us to know in the context of telling us.
Because I have some other class also, at 1 o'clock. I have to take 3-year classes.
Yeah, you told me. Sir, can we take up a few questions from?
Why not?
If you have, right, sir. So
Why
there
not?
is some problem in the Teams chat here. So I have been forwarded certain questions by the students personally.
You can take question at your own.
I will be reading out. Yes. So the question is.
वो क्वेश्चन मत पूछना कि कबूतर अगर कोई चिट्ठी लेके जाए,
हाँ जी, तो कैसे
कोई कबूतर चिट्ठी लेके जाए, कोई ऑफर लेके जाए और वही कबूतर एक्सेप्टेंस लेके आ जाए, तो क्या होगा? Will that be a valid contract? Very often this question is asked.
So very good question. I'll be reading out these questions. One question is, sir, don't you think minors are given a lot of immunity under the Indian Contract Act? Even if the minor commits fraud in projecting a false age, then too theoretically she does not get punished unless it is of criminal nature, while the aggrieved party stays aggrieved. Is this situation true in practical law as well? Can the aggrieved party really does not have much instruments for redressal of their damages?
आप एक बात बताइए मुझे. I will ask. Minor, the aspect of minority. I agree with you to a little extent that some kind of excessive immunity has been given to minors. This holds basically true in the case of criminal laws also. In 2002, a very popular case is there. When a minor was accused of a criminal case, but he was simply let off because he being a juvenile could not have been punished to the extent which other criminals were punished. As far as law is concerned, we are very clear that minors can't be sued, and if they falsely projected even also, it is the duty of the other person who has to be very cautious, while entering into contract with a person who turns out to be minor later on. The court, yes, it's a matter of, it is a subjective matter. Still, I would say the courts can, courts do always interfere in the case of the things which can be restituted. They are restituted with the original person.
Right, so this was.
But it can't be so in the case of cash. It can't be so in the case of cash.
Right. So this was question.
The things which can be identified can be restituted back, but it can't be set to be in the case of, because there is a point, 16 to 18 years point. That bracket has to be taken into consideration of this.
Right.
Yes. Next question.
Another question by Tushar Kochar. Is it hard to refute the judgment past case laws if someone is in similar circumstances than that of a case law in which the judgment is not favorable to them? How can
See,
they?
please ask again. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Is it hard to refute the judgment passed in past case laws if someone is in similar circumstance than that of a case law in which the judgment was not favorable to them? How can one ideally convince the court in his or her favor?
Acha, you are talking about the precedents.
Yes.
You're talking about the precedents. See, I would say categorically here, we take benefit of the old case laws. Sometimes they are so similar to our case laws which we are pleading that we say, my lord, the case is squarely covered by the facts and circumstances of the case. Similar facts there, similar facts here, and this decision was there, which is in favor to my client. So in this case also, this decision should be given. But I would say here, the courts are not bound. There is a doctrine of stare decisis. There is a doctrine of, the students may note this doctrine of stare decisis. The courts should follow the old decisions, but they still are not bound. हमें कई बार कह देते हैं कोर्ट्स, हम जब कहते हैं कि माय लॉर्ड ये सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कहा है, इसी में आप दो ना, हमारी फिल्म डिसीजन दो, कहते हैं गो टू सुप्रीम कोर्ट. Go to Supreme Court.
That's nice.
You gotta go to Supreme Court. Well, with all respect to courts of law.
Yeah.
They definitely come to our advantages also. You know, if they're not giving, if they're not acceding to our request, not prayer and our prayer, then there must be some aspect in their mind with respect to that aspect.
Another question by Shaurya Bansal. Sir, it is related to contract killers. Is a contract
killers.
Is the contract of killing someone for money a valid contract? Or can the man giving the contract sue the contract killer in the court of law saying that the other party has committed a breach of contract by not doing the job even after the payment of money? As every promise and every set of promises forming the consideration is an agreement.
आप बंसल जी, शौर्य बंसल जी, यार कमाल करते हो आप मैंने अभी तो आपको बताया कि कंसिडरेशन शुड बी लीगल. नंबर 1, इसमें कंसिडरेशन लीगल नहीं है. नंबर 2, द ऑब्जेक्ट, it should not be forbidden by law, it should not be injurious. Everything is violated here. So many sections are violated here. So how this contract is valid? First of all, for enforceability, you have to see the essentials of a contract, whether it is enforceable or not. All agreements, therefore, we are saying that all agreements are not enforceable. Only those agreements which undergo the test of all these provisions, they only are enforceable. And once a contract is enforceable, then nobody can stop any party from enforcing their rights and the other party's liabilities.
Right. Riddhi had the same question which earlier was answered. So I will take
Riddhi also answered.
Yeah. So Divyam Goel's question I will take up. Sir, in cases where a person alleges a superior of undue influence, how can the superior practically prove his innocence?
This is an undue influence, basically.
Undue influence. So how can the superior practically prove that he was not unduly influencing? How can he prove his innocence?
How can he, it is, so first of all, very पहली बात तो ये है, the person who is not in that dominant position, first he has to prove that the other party was in the superior position. The first onus is upon him. See, I am an employer, basically. I'm a lawyer. Let's say I'm a lawyer. In my team, there are 5 advocates. I want a property. Now, I am in a dominant position. I basically compel my junior to sell me a property, his house, of worth ₹1 crore to only ₹70 lakhs or 60 lakhs. Basically, while considering whether a person is in a dominant position or not, there has to be seen the gap in consideration. What is the gap in consideration? If the property was of 1 crore, the consideration is 95 lakhs. There is not much gap. इतना तो डिस्काउंट दे देता है जूनियर सीनियर को. ऑल राइट, 1 करोड़ का 90 लाख भी मुझे नहीं लगता ज्यादा है. बट वंस इट क्रॉसेस दैट लिमिट, see, there has to be cut-off line, and that cut-off line is not defined in any property matter. It always depends upon the facts and circumstances of each case and the other attending circumstances of the case, or other witnesses are there, other juniors or other similar kind of things are there, which shows that the consent to execute that agreement of that junior, the person in inferior position, was not voluntary. It was influenced by the undue influence. It was influenced unduly by the seniority, by the dominance of the other person.
I will take up this last question now by Aryan Sharma. Sir, I never really understood how someone can determine whether a person had intentions of making an agreement legally enforceable on the basis of form of relationship between the participating parties, because of which I feel it's kind of unfair to treat all domestic and social agreements as being void of legal enforceability. I feel it kind of allows for taking advantage of a loophole. For example, in Balfour versus Balfour case, in which Mr. Balfour left a very sick wife in England suffering from a disease for going to Sri Lanka on the promise that he will be sending money for survival, is not legally enforced to fulfill his commitment, because a domestic agreement is considered to be devoid of any intention to make it legally enforceable. So question that he raised out of this fact is, why do we deem agreements made in domestic and social capacity as not made with legal intention, as there are cases where it clearly needs to be enforceable, like Mrs. Balfour's? How can a person make a contract enforceable while being in domestic capacity with the other party? Is there no form of redressal in practical law of Mrs. Balfour and such aggrieved people?
Yes. First of all, I come to the last part of the question. Is there any other form by which this domestic relation can enforce the contract? See, husband in Balfour versus Balfour, the husband made a promise to his wife in Ceylon that if she doesn't reach her husband place in the due course of time, he will provide her wife so and so for consideration. Now, basically, the maintenance it is about the maintenance. Section 125 CRPC is there. In Indian context, I'm saying Section 23 of Hindu Marriage Act is there, and some other provisions in Domestic Violence Act is also there. Section 42. There are the provisions which enable a wife to claim maintenance from her legally wedded husband. All right. So there are other forms of enforcement laws there which can be used by those relations when everything has to go as per its own ambit, its own jurisdiction, its own nature. There cannot be a contract between a husband and a wife of maintaining a wife for which husband is otherwise also liable. Isn't a husband liable to maintain his wife? Otherwise also, if there is no contract. So therefore, that those contracts have been taken out of the ambit of this contract law, and they are this liability. I'm not saying about these contracts. This liability, this need can be enforced by some other provisions, not exactly contract.
And sir, if the wife is working only and the husband is not earning, can vice versa also happen? Practically,
आजकल होता है हो सकता है क्योंकि I say it is legally possible. I say it is legally possible. आजकल Domestic Violence Act में भी है. Domestic violence can be pleaded by the husband also. ये मेरे को मारती है. ठीक है ना? So that law is taking a dynamic change. So law is developing. Development or change is a rule of law. Day by day, case by case.
And then talk about the intention of the party. Intention to murder was there, intention to damage was there or not. How
Yes.
do courts come to know about the intention? How do they
Yes, no. Yes, I will tell you. Intention is just by the accused previous conduct with that party. Previous conduct with that party or any other independent impartial witness. See, मेरे को तो ना ये murder, culpable homicide, amounting to murder, not amounting to murder समझने में पूरी लॉ लग गई थी. हमारे प्रोफेसर बहुत अच्छे थे, प्रोफेसर आर एस ग्रेवाल बहुत अच्छे, उन्होंने बहुत अच्छे से हमें समझाया था, मुझे कुछ समझ में आ भी गया था, बट स्टिल दैट कट ऑफ, दैट थिन लाइन आई कुड नॉट demarcate. But as when I entered into practice, I came to know about this. There are two things only as far as criminal law is concerned. You will also come to know. Culpable homicide amounts to murder when intention is there. Culpable homicide does not amount to a murder when only knowledge is there and intention was not there. मेरी इच्छा नहीं थी कि मैं उसको मारूं, लेकिन वो मेरी किक या मेरा ब्लो इतना ज्यादा था कि वो मर गया. All right, and there are different sets of punishments for those two offenses. For punishment for murder ranges from life imprisonment to death, whereas punishment for not amounting to murder, ranges from only fine to life imprisonment. The amendment.
Monica ma'am, I have two questions. May I?
Please, Jasprit, go ahead.
Hello sir.
जसप्रीत जी बड़े चुपचाप बैठे थे पहले, अब वो आए.
मैं आपको सुन रही थी सर. इट वाज,
चलिए अब हम आपको सुनते हैं.
आपको सुनना बहुत अच्छा लगा. इट वाज अ वेरी यूजफुल, एंड जिस तरह से आपने केसेस कोट किए, हम तो पढ़ा रहे हैं बट आपने प्रैक्टिकल एस्पेक्ट हमें दिखाया.
नहीं, आप लोग तो बहुत अच्छे से पढ़ा रहे होंगे क्योंकि आप लोग तो स्पेशलाइज्ड हैं, हम लोग तो एडवोकेट्स हैं. हमने तो कभी कॉन्ट्रैक्ट लॉ में I can see. I have heard about very good. I have heard very good about Shri Aurobindo College of Commerce. That they are expert people in commerce studies.
Thank you.
And I give a compliment about that.
Thank you, sir. So nice of you.
And you are so lucky. Dr. Ajay Sharma is there along with you. He is very, 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 very particular about his things, and he can be said to be epitome of academic excellence. उन्होंने अपनी राह खुद बनाई है, अपनी जगह खुद बनाई, अपनी वजह से बनाई, अपनी मेहनत से.
We are witnessing it, sir. हम देख रहे हैं.
वो बड़े एक्टिव. जी प्लीज बताइए.
सर मेरा एक क्वेश्चन तो क्या है, बस एक डाउट है. Caution, undue influence, fraud, कुछ भी होता है. Aggrieved party has a burden to prove that.
Aggrieved party.
Yes. So is it not the irony of the law कि जिसके साथ गलत हो रहा है उसे प्रूव करना पड़ता है, और ना प्रूव कर पाए तो
आप मेरे को बताओ फिर कौन प्रूव करेगा?
I know sir, I understand that.
और कौन करेगा?
अगर किसी हालात में सर वो ना प्रूव कर पाए
तो क्या फिर क्या?
I know, yeah. So
no standard of proof. He has to prove. The liability is upon him.
The onus is on
के साथ. Yes, the burden of proof is on him. Burden of proof, I would say.
Yeah.
Burden of proof is on him. Burden of proof always remains on the person who has brought about that suit.
All right.
And once once his prima facie is successful in discharging that burden of proof, then it is the onus which shifts from that person to the other person.
To the other person.
The other person who has allegedly committed the wrong.
Okay.
अगर मेरे को कोई कहता है, उसने प्रूव कर दिया कि मैं वहां था. Now the onus has shifted on me to prove that I was not there.
Okay.
This is a plea of alibi.
Okay.
All right.
And sir, one more small question. It is not related with the Indian Contract Act. It is related with Factories Act, wherein I couldn't get a right answer. May I ask you, please?
क्या बताइए.
Sir, Factories Act में section होता है, section 8 of inspecting staff, in which we have inspectors, deputy inspector, chief inspector.
हम लोग ना वैसे इंडस्ट्रियल डिस्प्यूट्स एक्ट ज्यादा करते हैं. Factories Act बताइए. मैं I will.
Sir, general question है.
बताइए please.
Inspectors, chief, additional deputy inspectors should not be related to any factory in the area in which they are getting appointed, right?
To ensure their impartiality.
Yeah, to be unbiased and Sir, if I get appointed as today chief inspector in Ludhiana, so I can give in writing that neither me nor my relative किसी की industry नहीं affected
इस
नहीं है,
area में
yes, I'm totally unrelated. What if sir आज से 2 साल बाद मेरे father एक factory set up कर ले, will I be taken as interested party?
अच्छा, आप ये बात की किसी कर रहे हैं जो इस फैक्ट्री इंस्पेक्टर की बात कर रहे हो ना?
जी
फैक्ट्री इंस्पेक्टर्स आर अपॉइंटेड बाय गवर्नमेंट.
Yes sir, appropriate government.
Appropriate government, the competent authorities, you may say.
Right sir.
You know, if they have other areas, they can transfer you to that area also.
So this
it will not be proper for you to inspect a factory which has been set by your papa.
Right.
So that for that purpose, you know, similar is the case in the case of judges also.
Okay.
Basically, what happens, you know, अब नहीं हो पाता है ये चीज नहीं हो पाती. अब मैं चंडीगढ़ से बिलोंग करता हूँ.
Right.
Now, future I become judge.
Okay.
Let's say High Court, but High Court has a seat in Chandigarh only. Now it is basically to ensure one's own impartiality, one's own independence, and avoid favoritism. These are all ethics. Basically, we are to follow. We should follow. And in the case of your case proposition, I would say, if the concerned authority have other inspecting zones also in which your father doesn't have any factory, they would shift you to that place.
Okay, transfer.
Or there may be some other arrangement of working that to that factory, your father's factory, that inspector will not go. Some other person will go.
Okay. So it is not pan-India. It is not pan-India.
See, it depends upon the government. If it is central government, it is pan-India.
Okay, right.
If it is state government, then it is pan-state.
Right.
The appointing authority depends upon the appointing authority.
Right.
Sir, I think we should not take much of your time. We see somewhere else also. But
नहीं और कोई बताइए कुछ. I am enjoying.
We really wanted to take this further, but we understand everything. And Ajay sir, he could not remain in the meeting because he was to deliver some session somewhere else. So he has left. Now I'll request Jasprit to present a vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Monica ma'am and Dr. Deepak Jindal sir. It's a pleasure listening to you. It's a lovely learning from you, and you touched all the, as I told you, हम तो पढ़ाते हैं, but आपने practical aspect touch किया. I can recall all the cases in my mind, all those names, Mohri Bibi, Dharmodas and all. So thank you so very much, sir. Thank you so very much. I'm short of words to actually show my gratitude. I really enjoyed. आपने कहा मैं silent बैठी थी. I was really, deeply listening to you.
नहीं, मैंने साइलेंट बैठी थी. आपके पॉजिटिव उसमें बोला है कि आप ना हर चीज को अच्छे से सुनते हो पहले और अपने आप को फ्रेम करते हो, उसके बाद then you come out.
Right, sir. Right. I was really enjoying, and it was really, I was taking it inside me. And sir, I think so do all my audience, all my students must have enjoyed, learned the practical aspect. And sir, on behalf of my management, on behalf of Dr. Ajay, my faculty members, my students, Monica ma'am, we are so very much thank you to you, sir. And we surely look forward to learn more from you.
Thank you so much, Madam Jasprit and Monica Sethi ji.
Sir,
I am so privileged to be here to deliver this lecture, and I'm honored by your presence also, this 36 plus students. Dear students, you're always welcome. If you find any difficulty, you call me up. You can take my number. And you are so lucky you have teachers like Monica Sethi ji and Jasprit Kaur. And basically your principal, Dr. Ajay Sharma, he is a dynamic personality. You can approach him every time you face any problem. And with this, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Take care, sir. You too.